and then we will dive right in.
Okay, you want us to start?
Please, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm Maddie Kempner. I'm the policy director at NOFA Vermont, which is the Northeast Organic Farming Association. I know some of you, but not many of you actually, which is exciting. So really nice to be introduced. And we're just going to share a little bit about our organization and our scope, our programs, and then we'll get into some specific policy priorities. And as for myself, I live up in Cambridge. I graduated from Vermont Law School in 2016 and have been with NOFA Vermont for going on 8 years now, doing policy work in some capacity for all of that time, and also have 3 tiny children at home. So
I'm Grace O'Dell. I am the executive director of NOFA Vermont, and I've been at NOFA about 4 years now. My background is in farming and agriculture and community organizing. I ran a farm in California, a larger production farm, and also an educational center and farm in Massachusetts before I came here. And I'm also mom to 3 small ones. So as with many of our staff, we have a lot of kid wrangling between us all. We're excited to be here today with you all and hear your intros, share a little bit, and get into some discussion.
Guess we'll go this way. I'm Josie Levitt. I'm the rep from Grand Isle, Chittenden, which is all of Grand Isle County, and West Milton. Blissfully, I have no children, and just wrangle my dog.
Mike Rice, Bangton, Rutland District, Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Perth.
John Ryan, good to see you guys too. Represent Royalton and Patrick.
I'm Esme Cole. I represent Windsor 6 in Hartford, Vermont.
Heather Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
And David Durfee, we met, I don't think that we have met, Grace, but I represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland in Bennington County.
Rodney Graham, represent Orange 3, Williamstown, and Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille, District 1, represents Stowe, and I'm more of a forestry and timber rep here. I did raise 3 sons.
let's talk. I also have all boys, so great respect. You got through it. I'm happy to see it.
Charles Wilson from Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
How many children?
No need to share.
It's really just a way that we say, like, lower your bar.
Yeah.
Lower your bar. This is our state, so.
You seem tired.
Yeah, exactly. If we can't recall words, this is why.
I have 3. No, I was gonna go ahead. I was gonna start with how many I
We
have.
had 3 horses.
Oh,
Okay.
Have to
Also,
count for something.
also quite expensive and lots of work.
Yeah.
I understand.
So I have 3 sons. I'm David Templeman, rep from Orleans 3. Yeah.
you met Allure Ridge earlier, excuse me, and then maybe we would like to know who's visiting with us today.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Caroline Gordon with Rural Vermont. I was not able to introduce myself in person yesterday, so I need to say hi and listen to you guys.
Nice to see you. Yeah. Well,
I'm Victoria Landino. I'm an intern for Representative Byrd in transportation.
good. Nice to have you with us.
I'm Wade Mullen. I'm a legislative intern for Representative Houghton and Representative Dolan of Essex.
Great. Good. Well, we're glad you could.
Our one NOFA member is not here.
Oh,
Rodney might be too, are you?
We are too.
You are too,
yeah.
Well, we are hoping to change that. I'll say that.
All right, let's go. We got started a little bit late, so if
We can give this a 2.5 speed. That'll be great.
Okay. So I want to leave plenty of time for you to say what you would like us to hear, and then for us to follow up with any questions. So if we need to run past 11, I think that should be okay, and we'll adjust accordingly.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we'll start and just share a little bit about our organizations, or our organization and some of our programs.
Yeah. So again, we're NOFA Vermont, or more lengthily titled the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. We are one of many chapters of NOFA, which extends to all the New England states, and we're in partnership with MOFGA, which is a similar organization up in Maine. And we're a member-driven nonprofit, so we really report to our members, and we have a farmer-led board, democratic participation, meaning representation from those we serve is long been core to the organization. And we have participatory committees to advise us on our policy moves, as well as govern the organization itself. So we were founded 52 years ago now, we're in 2023, by a group of farmers who believed that they could really farm in a way that worked for people and the planet, and that Vermont could be a leader for the future of agriculture. And we, as I sort of mentioned, we retain a lot of these core values that founded the movement and founded the organization, which are really about stewardship of land and communities, care, mutual respect for people and place, equity, and ecology. And we feel like these values that formed the organization are really more needed than ever. We want to sort of present ourselves as standing at a critical moment. What we see here in Vermont is intense corporate consolidation in the food system. This was most widely covered with the Horizon drop situation, where Horizon dropped a whole bunch of organic farmers. But we see that pressure far beyond Horizon. There's consolidation. It is cheaper to produce food other places. And that's going to be true always in Vermont because of the way that our land is. And corporations seek profit, not necessarily community investment. And we believe that Vermont needs to take action to really support small producers. We also see an intensification of climate change and ecological decline affecting our producers. We have erratic flooding, erratic weather. We have a number of members who represent forestry. My husband's a forester. People are tapping, or this maple season is enough to say things are weirding, if not necessarily warming. And our producers are having to pivot quickly to deal with that and all of its fallout. The demand for farmland and land in general is at a record high, making it harder to access farmland for farmers, harder to keep land, and that demand is only going to come up as people migrate here, as we've seen since COVID. We also layer onto that the aging and shrinking farmer demographic. There are fewer people growing food for the people who live here. They're getting older, and they are looking for a transition out. So a lot of the work that we do is sort of helping those people stay in and make a plan around what's coming next, and then help the new people feel like it's a viable path forward. That all of those very large, overwhelming problems have answers, and we believe that the solutions are very available to us right now. We have the core ideas are coming from our farmers and our farm workers already around what a thriving future looks like. We just need to sort of listen and invest in those. So again, this is just to sort of hammer home this point that our goal as an organization, although we have grown, we are now more than 30 people all around the state. We listen and we work with every community. We're in every county. And if you have a question about X issue affecting Y place in Vermont, we can help you to identify a farmer or group of farmers from that place to come in and give you their firsthand experience. So what our mission is really calling us to build a food and agricultural future that is really centered on people, on land, and on justice. What does thriving look like in the future is the question we sit with. We run a bunch of programs in order to enable that. So the organization started by and for farmers. This was long before there was a national organic program. It was farmers coming together and saying, hey, how do you do this? How do we teach each other? How do we share resource? How can we go visit each other's farms and learn? And that core farmer services team has remained really important to the organization. It's grown to really focus in on farm viability, business planning, transfer planning programs. Also, we provide funding opportunities. We run some major grant programs that we give between $200,000 and $300,000 out through grants a year for sort of farm viability and resilience in general. But we've also grown to work on the other side. So we have a farm to school team and a team that works on food access. So we administer EBT programs. We're the sole administrator here in the state of Vermont for direct point of sale EBT. That means anytime someone's using EBT not in the grocery store, we're helping that happen. So that's like using EBT at a farm stand or at a farmer's market. And we also work with school meals professionals. So when the local food purchasing incentive happened last year, we are providing technical assistance to the people in schools so that those folks know how to access food that's potentially not readily available to them. We also have an advocacy and policy arm. Maddie, our illustrious policy director, who you know, works not only here in the state, but we're also a member of larger coalitions nationally and even internationally. But we participate in the National Family Farm Coalition. We work on the Farm Bill. We're members of NOP, and which is the National Organic Coalition. And we work for sort of federal change. And then we're also members of IFOAM, which is an organic organization that is international, really working on standards all around the world. We finally have an education and community building arm that is really about helping educate the general population. We put on events, we get people out to farms in the summer, we have social series and workshops, and we're really trying to be this bridge between people who really primarily interact with food and farming through what they buy and what they eat, and people who are producers, and helping people form direct relationships. So there's understanding, communication, and a sense of culture shared. We also own, which we'll get to later, but we own an LLC, which is legally separated from us, called Vermont Organic Farmers.
That one just for a second.
Yeah, this is an accreditation, a regulatory agency that is certified by the USDA National Organic Program that certifies farms. So they are nested within NOFA, but they have some separation. That's because within the National Organic Program, we're not allowed to provide help to the people we certify. So those actually staff teams are separate. But these people are those who ensure integrity. When you go into the co-op and you see either the Vermont Certified Organic Seal or just the USDA Organic Seal on a local product, we were certifying that. If we go back here, I'll just say this is an upcoming thing that's just sort of shines a light on what we mean by the kind of education and community building we do. We put on the largest agricultural conference in Vermont every year. We're back this year to being in person, which is super exciting after a couple of years of remote, which is just a really unfun way to conference if you've tried it. And we're having, it happens at UVM. It's a couple of days of intensive workshops, keynote speakers, chance to meet with lobbyists, chance for people to meet and build community. We have a keynote speaker, Winona LaDuke, coming, and we have a little invite for you in your folders. You are more than welcome to join us. We would love to see you there. Our federal delegation often comes, and it's a lovely time to sort of celebrate the culture of agriculture in Vermont and help imagine a future for it together.
And I would just say also, especially for committee members who are new, but also those of you who have been around a while, if you peruse the workshop offerings, I will also say we can offer free registration for legislators. We would love for you to join us, and we happily extend that invite to you. If you look through our program, I think you'll see that it's an incredible opportunity to really connect with people in your community who will be there and to learn about issues that are happening in the state currently. It's a good way to sort of get oriented, I think, and also just be a part of some connectivity and joy and relationship building outside of the State House. So just want to echo that invitation. We'd love to have you if you can make it. Okay, and then I was going to just share a little bit more about Vermont Organic Farmers, our certification program. These are our hot off the presses statistics, everyone's favorite thing, from the end of 2022. So as of December 2022, we have 771 certified producers. That includes both farmers and processors in the state. Vermont historically, and I believe still currently, has one of the highest number of certified operations per capita. So comparatively to our neighbors in New Hampshire, who in the past have had around 200 certified operations, Vermont has a lot of organic producers. So I just want to emphasize that, because organic is a value that a lot of farmers in Vermont and processors and other businesses really share. These are some of the stats on gross sales and the number of acres certified. And then I always think it's interesting to see, and I hope it is for you, the breakdown of the types of operations that are certified. And you'll notice, and maybe this is a particular interest to you, Representative Lipsky, that our highest percentage of certified operations currently are maple producers. So there are over 200, I think it's 245 certified organic maple operations in the state. That is by far has been our fastest growing scope of certification in recent years.
Just a brief question.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can syrup be anything but organic?
It's
Excellent question.
It's the question we always get.
Yeah.
We have standards, not around, when you think of organic, many people think like pesticides or herbicide application and the absence thereof. What the standard also calls out is sugar bush management regulations. So you can't poultry harvest, you have to manage for biodiversity, and there are sort of ecological standards built in. So we have actually pretty rigorous standards there to sort of protect. And when you think about how many acres are converting to maple operations right now, if they all become sort of cleared out for just maple, it sort of repeats the problem of a monoculture crop just in the forest. So we're sort of working on that side of things.
I will say also we're kind of unique in that respect among certifiers that are accredited by the USDA, in that it's obviously a really key crop and practice here for us in Vermont, where it's not necessarily across the country. So the USDA doesn't really have standardized guidelines for maple production in the way that they do for other scopes of production. So we have these standards that are still approved by the USDA, but we are also, frankly, facing competition from other certifiers who have less rigorous standards, who are starting to move in and certify operations in the state. And we really, as a certifier, believe deeply in organic integrity and by being led by producers. So VOF has a review committee of farmers who actually meets regularly to review any changes to the guidelines or the standards, the way that we implement them, which is really important to our core values. And we also have to sort of walk this line between having really high standards and high integrity in our organic production, and also being a viable option for producers where, they can still utilize our certification service in a way that works for them in their marketing. So that's just to say, maple is a really great example of kind of the issue of integrity and how important it is to us.
Representative O'Brien has a question, but I just wanted to emphasize or clarify. The numbers that we're looking at here are certifications that you've done that VOF did during the past year, that there are other organizations that provide organic certification in Vermont. And this is the interesting thing, I think, that they're not necessarily using the same standards.
Yeah, that's a really important also point of nuance. So all of the accredited certification organizations that are accredited under USDA certify to the same regulations. Where there are differences is in areas of interpretation where, for example, the regulations may not be as clear as we would like. And some of that is good, right? Some of the regulations need to be a little bit flexible in order to recognize the geography and the climate in different places, for example, or different scales of production. But there have been challenges, which I think actually maybe you, Representative Templeman, called out, the issue of hydroponic certification in organic.
When did I do that?
Excellent example. It's funny to be in the room. I am spying on you all a little bit.
You looked at my notes.
Purely through YouTube, I promise.
Okay.
And so that's an area of the regulations that isn't as clear as we frankly would like it to be in terms of the requirement for soil building practices in organic production. So that's why some certification organizations like CCOF out in California have moved forward with certifying operations that are hydroponic under organic standards. We don't certify hydroponic operations. So that's kind of a good example of that.
Representative O'Brien.
We spend a lot of time talking about the definition of farming here. And so I wondered if NOFA has that too. So like something like besides say maple crop, like tree farming, certified tree farmers, silviculture, cannabis, all these sort of peripheral, are they farming, are they not farming things? Like how do you decide what to certify, for example, or recognize as organic farming?
It's a good question. I mean, some of that, especially in terms of cannabis, has to do with federal regulation. So we are not legally allowed as a federally accredited certifier to certify cannabis operations, since cannabis is still viewed as a Schedule I substance at the federal level. We can, however, do education for cannabis producers, which is one of the offerings at our conference. Actually, we have a workshop on organic practices for cannabis production. So we can help growers with that on the education side, not necessarily as of yet, at least on the certification side. And I would say in terms of forestry, that's also an area that generally doesn't fall under our scope of certification. And I've had conversations with people like David Brin from Vermont Family Forests over the years of what like a regenerative organic forestry certification would look like, very much in passing, but we don't delve into that.
We do work closely with the Audubon and a program that is bird friendly forestry. So we sort of have these partner orgs where we can say, they can help you if you want to do that. I do think it's interesting. I mean, there's a real focus on sort of farm viability and that, and farming as defined by you make your living, you make more than half of your living from your farm operation, whether it includes whatever, kind of product or scope. I will say that on the nonprofit side of things, we primarily offer business services, financial planning services, and most of our grant opportunities are really aimed at people who make their living doing agriculture. I will say we have a new resilience grants program, which is a smaller micro grant of $2,500 that's really aimed to get at social resilience, ecological resilience, and economic resilience. And that has, again, this farmer-led board that decides who gets funded. They've been challenging the organization on these definitions of what is farming. They've been saying, well, if someone has a day job, but they're also producing food that feeds their community, should you not value that? So we're getting some challenge back in that way. And sort of in this conversation around food sovereignty and food resilience for the state, I think it's a point that is worth considering. How do we support these really smallholder people, even if it can't be measured economically? That being said, most of the business service provision and sort of technical assistance we offer, matching farmers with buyers, et cetera, really is people who are making their living doing this.
Representative Rice?
Just to note that when the agency of ag was here and we were asking about homesteaders and small growers, they said there are plenty of resources out there for them, like NOFA. So.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Noted.
I think the best way that we serve, I was going to say that.
I think they're right.
The primary way that we serve that scale of producer is through our educational workshops. We really strive in our winter conference offerings and our on-farm workshops to have workshops that are for smaller scale producers. So that's absolutely true.
Yeah. That wasn't actually my question. My question is, how do these numbers break down? So if you have somebody who's certified for, say, maple and dairy, how are they represented?
Yeah, great question. They are counted twice in this. Yep. So they're counted in both places. And actually, I should have.
But not to the total, right? That figure is individual. 771 is indivial operations.
I believe so. Yes. And then I think in the percentages,
they go everything.
Yes. Because there are plenty of those folks.
Yes, Representative Tom.
Very quick, what is EBT? You mentioned that several times.
Oh, yes. So that is a federal program for, I think it's just electronic benefits transfer. It's just like
stamps.
Food stamps.
Yeah.
Okay.
3 squares.
It's the way that people use SNAP or 3 Squares Vermont benefits electronically.
Acronym?
EBT.
So if you're using an EBT card is often, the way that people are using their SNAP or 3 Squares Vermont benefits to purchase food.
I'm curious.
Yes.
I'm pleased to see vegetables and fruit are the second largest share of the pie over dairy. I'm sort of.
That's been changing. And we will get into this in our policy priorities, but organic dairy is experiencing a crisis right now. Ever since the Horizon thing, that was emblematic of a pattern that was not limited to those producers. It used to be that the cost of production for organic was exceeded by the pay price. And that's just been slowly going down over the last decade. And the federal programs that support conventional operations like the dairy margin, which is an insurance program to support conventional farms, it isn't designed with organic costs built into the formula. And so it doesn't work for organic producers. And they're closing quickly. When I started at the organization about 4 years ago, less than 4 years ago, we had close to 200 certified organic dairies. We are down to 141. We are hearing from producers that we stand to lose 25 to 30 in the next couple of months unless there's an infusion. Those folks were helped out over the last couple of years with the COVID payments, with the PPP program, that sort of loaded people for a little bit. But the fact of the matter is the federal milk pricing and the milk buyers aren't paying what it costs to produce organic dairy in this state. And people are just not able to continue patching it along. So we'll get into that separately, and we've asked for a joint session hearing on this topic within the next week or two.
It's actually being scheduled, I believe it's confirmed for next Thursday, the 26th. So you'll hear more from us on this and the specific economic impacts, and you'll also hear from some producers next week, either who are currently at risk of going out or who have recently gone out of business.
Great. I know you've got a question, David. Representative Graham, let you go.
So on the dairy farms, are they shutting down or they're going back to conventional?
A little of both, my understanding. And Grace, you know.
Yeah, it's some of everything. Some people are selling and just selling, period, and getting out. Some people are converting to conventional to get that differential. Some people are selling their herd, but keeping their land in hay for the time being while they figure out a transition plan.
And I'll just say for next week as well, Jen Miller, who's our Farmer Services Director, and Mike Thresher, who is a member of our board and also on the board of the Northeast Ag and Feed Alliance and a nutritionist at Morrison's Custom Feeds, will be there to present. And they are really the people that are working on the ground with producers and can speak to a lot more of those details of sort of where folks are going.
And just to be clear, the joint hearing is we will be hosting the joint hearing.
Yes.
So here in this room, so it's us.
It is in this room.
I think.
In that detail, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
with a joint, because the Senate Ag Committee will be part of it as well, and they won't be here in person just because of the space limitations, but they'll be on camera with us.
Thanks. Thank you for.
So yeah, we'll definitely having more of a conversation about that.
So we've been acknowledging this problem. Yesterday, we had a meeting regarding it, and what appears to be probably the biggest contributor to this problem is grain prices. So on your chart here, what percentage is feed grain that's certified organic being grown in Vermont?
There's almost none. And that's one of the things that it's really, again, back to the scale question. If you think about the landscape of Vermont, we have, we're really, really beautifully set up for small scale grazing operations. It's harder to produce grain here than it is other places. So we do think that this is something we're looking at. There's a federal program called the Transition to Organic Partnerships Program. And there's some money being put into these federal programs to explore. And we're partnering with Heather Darby and Todd Hardy, who is the president of the Northeast Grain Growers Association, he's also on our board, and he's very committed to helping build an organic grain market here and in the region, but more broadly. Right now, a lot of organic grain comes from Ukraine, which is obviously been highly affected by global news. So the costs for grain over the last year were, many factors higher, and India and supply chain issues really affected that. So yes, it's sort of thinking about holistic systems and sort of how to produce what we need here is one of the federal goals and one of our goals long term.
Yeah, I should say in terms of organic dairy, we are absolutely seeking both kind of emergency relief to support producers who are at risk of going out of business and mid and long-term solutions to really create a more viable economic system for dairy and for all of our kind of small scale and organic and diversified producers going forward. We're trying to work on all of those at once. And interestingly, as we're going through these VOF statistics, I'm realizing I should, and if you're interested, I could always set this up. I should have included some information about just what the organic standards are and what they entail. I think we often, as the folks who are really close to that, often sort of skip over that part of information around what the organic regulations entail. So it is, as Grace alluded to, a lot of people generally, when they think of organic, they think of the absence of certain things, the absence of GMOs, synthetic fertilizers, toxic pesticides that persist in the environment. And the way that we try to operationalize the regulations, and this is really reflected in the word wording of the regulations in the organic statute is really focused also on what producers do put into their operations, like the promotion of biodiversity, trying to function in relationship with the nature, with the natural environment on the farm as much as possible, as opposed to just relying on input substitution to create fertility, for example. So.
Can you just give an illustration of processors? So who are processors that you're certifying?
Yeah, so some of the processors we certify are coffee roasters, for example. And I will say in terms of maple also, there is this sort of sugar bush component. And then in terms of the final product, there are standards that are also applied there on the processor side of maple operations, which is to say that maple processors are not allowed to use synthetic defoamers, for example. I don't know if like my brother putting hot dogs in his sap as it boils would qualify, maybe depending on the hot dog. As a defoamer. Yeah.
Organic hot dogs only.
Yeah, so when it comes to processors, it's really a question of whether the ingredients in a processed product are organic. And there's actually, not to get too wonky here, but there are different degrees and different terminology that processed products are able to use on their label, depending on the percentage of ingredients that are organic. So you might see products on the store shelves that say made with organic whatever, made with organic corn, like tortilla chips, you see that a lot. But it won't have that USDA logo on it because it has to be more than 90% of the product that's made up of organic ingredients. So there's some gradients there.
Representative Lipsky.
You know, it's food. We're fortunate in Vermont, there's some good bread bakers right in our region, Elmore Mountain, Red Hen. Mm-hmm. Some of their breads say, you know, locally grown organic grains.
Yeah.
I'm trying to eat as little bread as I can, but does that come under food crop if it's Vermont produced grains for some of these local?
And we do certify a couple of like human consumption grain operations, the Nitty Gritty Grain Company. And as I mentioned, Todd Hardy produces organic grain at his farm. And there are a handful of producers who do it.
And they're under that field crop slice. Yeah. We're big Red Hen fans. We
try to eat as much bread as possible.
bread and pastries. I really appreciate that our office is in Richmond and actually takes us right past Red Hen.
Yeah, when we come back,
we're fans.
It's a delicious job. I mean, basically we eat delicious food all the time. It's really good.
That's a plug for the conference as well. We have good snacks. We care a lot about snacks and feeding people.
Snacks before content.
So speaking of, I do want to get into a little bit more of our policy priorities, and you have a sheet in your folders that we handed out that really details all of this for you. And I think I don't know if it makes sense to leave this up on the screen. I guess we can, if you all want to review it. I don't know if there's any other sort of general questions about our scope or what we've presented so far before we jump into the policy issues.
Yes, Representative Tuffy.
Just real quick regarding your certification standards, does no-till or manure spreading fall into this? Just two very separate things, but I'm curious about both.
There are producers who produce using no-till methods, but they have to still meet all of the other organic regulations. So you couldn't, for example, be an operation that grows a cover crop and then, burns it down with glyphosate. Right. That would not be allowed. There are some producers who are starting to experiment more and more with like mechanical no-till methods.
But it's not one of your criteria.
We don't require no-till.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's allowed if it doesn't. If it isn't accompanied by other.
And mechanical manure spreading in the conventional sense, like, liquid manure being spread by truck on farm.
Yep, some organic producers still practice that. We also have producers who compost manure or have other, alternative manure management strategies. But yeah, liquid manure management is still allowed within organic.
Very good.
Yeah.
One of the requirements around organic certification is a minimum amount of days that the animals are on the land.
6 months, isn't it?
It's
120 days is the
120 days.
minimum across the board for USDA.
Although there is some variation within sort of that allows for weather. So that can change slightly year to year. But that is sort of, you know, a manure management strategy in and of itself.
Absolutely.
So soil being the basis of the organic program is really important to Vermont organic farmers. And it's, you know, why we talk about soil health as the basis for, you know, in general, ecological health. And so we're really interested in maintaining soil microbiome that will allow for healthy plants, that will allow for healthy pollinators, that will allow for healthy food to grow. So we take soil health really, really seriously. And we have a soil health cohort, Jack Laser of blessed memory, who founded Butterworks Farm. He, along with his partner Ann, founded Butterworks Farm. We started a program in his honor called the Soil Health Stewards Program, and we have far more demand than we can meet. We've actually added a veg cohort and dairy cohort and livestock cohort this year to really do farmer to farmer learning, spend a lot of time with experts and with each other, getting really detailed soil health support. And we're also actually this year going to be part of a soil health benchmarking study that has been run out of Pennsylvania for many years. So on some of these big federal funds called Climate Smart dollars, we're going to be doing a big soil health benchmarking project here in Vermont too, to really look at soil health more holistically, look at life in the soil. So that's a place where a lot of our organizational focus is.
I will also say, if you're interested, those soil health stewards have expressed an interest in hosting legislators on their farms this summer, and we are really hoping to help set that up, so.
Okay, good. Representative Lipsky.
We're talking about soil health, and I'm glad to see highlighted PFAS here, because it's really affecting our public water supplies, all our municipal wastewater. It's not an emerging crisis, it's a real huge deal.
Yeah.
So as a lay person, where does PFAS in farming seem to come from?
Question.
A lot of what we've seen in Maine was applied through sludge and slurry mix. So again, I mentioned MOFGA, which is our sister organization in Maine. They're just ahead of us because they started testing for PFAS on some farms, and they found that there was really deep and persistent contamination of PFAS chemicals from municipal sludge application. Yeah.
Which is not allowed in organic production.
Which has not been allowed in organic production. So it's one of those things where we didn't know about PFAS, but it is, sludge application does still happen.
Yes, to some extent. And you would have to talk to the Agency of Ag and Natural Resources about the extent to which that's been done in Vermont and how recently.
PFAS are also found certain places. And, you know, they're found in certain chemicals that are used widely. And so thinking about banning those chemicals is, you know, a potential. There's two things. There's one, like stopping the further spread, which is an action that remains very needed. And there's ameliorating and handling the situation of what to do with the PFAS that is endemic. Currently, it's in the water, it's in the soil. What do we do about that? I think there's a little bit of like a worry that once we start testing and we start finding it, what are we going to do? You know, that sort of like testing within the schools on, you know, those environmental PCBs. So we're very closely partnered with Maine. What we've seen already in Maine was that MOFGA, our sister, initially stood up a fund to help some of those farms who are impacted in amelioration, buying other hay, looking to remediate the whole soil on the farm or move. But it's a massive cost. As you can imagine, the state has now established a fund themselves, I believe.
In Maine.
Not here. But that's a likely conversation that will need to happen here. People are starting to freak out about PFAS, and rightly so.
Just the final follow-up from me. You know, there are these very glossy plastic or some wrapping of brown bales, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not necessarily perfectly collected everywhere over the years. Do they have any, are they plastic, or would they have any PFAS in them?
I don't know about that product in particular, but that's the issue of plastics in agriculture is just an ongoing challenge that a lot of our organic producers in particular, and this is just probably a lot of producers worry about this, but I just happen to know about the organic perspective, which is there are not allowed, in organic production, not going too far down a rabbit hole, in organic production, a lot of folks still use black plastic. They still plant into black plastic to suppress weeds and to capture heat in the soil. And there are not allowed products in organic production that are biodegradable mulches. Those exist on the market, but they're not allowed in organic because of concerns about byproducts and the breakdown of those or the products that go into manufacturing them. So we have producers all the time expressing so much concern about not wanting to use acres and acres worth of black plastic that then ends up in little shredded bits in their field. And so that's an issue that we're kind of continuing to work on at the federal level to try to get those, to try to encourage actually manufacturers to make products that are biodegradable that can be approved for organic use. But that's sort of, that's just one example of the broader issue of plastics in agriculture that I think have major implications for this PFAS conversation and just soil contamination in general.
So on that note, are organic dairy farmers wrapping their round bales in white plastic? Is that allowed or is that not allowed under your standard?
It is allowed.
It is allowed, okay.
Yeah, and that's really depending on the way that folks are managing their feed, necessary still in some operations. And that might be another example where in the future we may have a different option. We may have some kind of biodegradable option, which I'm not sure that would work with those round bale wraps. But right now that's the only option for some folks.
Representative Levitt?
Oh, I just have a question. If we can, I'm just jumping down to the bottom here.
Yeah, sure.
Your priority about reinvesting tax revenue from cannabis sales into communities disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we are a part of the Vermont Cannabis Equity Coalition along with Rural Vermont and the Vermont Growers Association and Vermont Racial Justice Alliance or Justice for All. And so one of our priorities in terms of the rollout of the adult use cannabis market is that reinvestment piece. And we have started talking to some legislators about a sort of an omnibus bill that would just address some of the real severe equity considerations that we have as this market rolls out. There are a lot of ways in which our adult use cannabis market is structured to benefit existing players and multinational corporations who already sort of had some stake in Vermont's cannabis market under the medical provisions and now have an expanded role in the adult use marketplace. So our priorities around cannabis are really that reinvestment piece and making sure that we are, as we are profiting as a state from this product that has historically had really damaging effects from its prohibition, that we are investing some of that revenue in repairing some of those harms that have been done, especially to communities of color, and improving access to small scale and especially outdoor growers. There are some real challenges. I don't know if Rural Vermont spoke to this yesterday. This is something I work really closely with Graham, especially on. There are some real challenges in the way that our adult use market has been rolled out that make it very challenging for farmers who are, existing and working in agricultural fields to add cannabis as a diversified crop in their operations for all kinds of reasons. So those are some of the things that we're looking to address.
Thank you. That's great.
If I could return just briefly to the question about plastics, I will say there's another issue that's sort of related to the one that you raised around the universal recycling law that we're also concerned and monitoring on the issue of depackers in Vermont. And actually I have submitted an op-ed sticker that will be coming out in 3 days, I think, on this issue. But we are supportive of the coalition that's been working on this depacker issue. And I just want to raise up. This is sort of a similar problem, right? It's a multinational corporation that came in after Vermont established the universal recycling law, which was intended to help us compost our waste and really be stewards as a state. And instead, what's happening in the vanguard, depackers, which are in name composting food waste, they're actually crushing food waste with plastic together. So if an apple has a sticker or a zucchini is wrapped in plastic, that's being crushed together. And then the compost that's coming out of those facilities is contaminated. And then it's being sold as compost. So we need to close that loophole. ANR is currently interpreting that source separation requirement as in an open way that's allowing for these corporations to get in here. They see a market. They see like, oh, this is being required. The whole state's going to do this. We can get in here. And actually Vanguard is owned by BlackRock, which itself is one of the top 3, manufacturers of single-use plastics in the world. So they're getting in on the front, they're getting in on the back end. There are small farmers here in Vermont doing excellent composting already who wish to be in on this market and are doing source separation, are making excellent compost that's a benefit, sequestering carbon. It's cleaning the soil, it cleans the water. It's like the antidote. But these things are being presented to the market as the same. So that's a huge thing that we need to take action on right now. And there is a coalition working on that depacker issue.
We've already touched a little bit on the organic dairy crisis, and you'll hear more about that from us next week. We are also part of a coalition of organizations that are really focused on food security and also getting more local and organic foods into schools and other institutions. So we really are wanting to see permanent funding and support for the local foods incentive grant that you all stood up last year. And we have a key role in that, especially currently Helen Rortvedt, who's our food access and farm to school programs director, has really worked directly with schools and school nutrition programs, as Grace, I think, mentioned earlier, to allow them to be set up to accept and to buy more local food into their school meals programs, because there is often, there are different things that go into that versus if you're just buying all of your food from Sodexo. So we have sort of a technical assistance role in that program, and also really are excited about just the win-win that it presents in terms of supporting healthy outcomes for kids in schools, and also supporting our farmers in our community, who we constantly hear from farmers that there is a local school in my town, and why is that not a market for my products? We want to be able to sell to schools. And so I think unraveling some of the complexities that make that really challenging in practice is a huge priority for us, and will continue to be. And then also just we are strong supporters of permanent funding and support for universal meals, and all the benefits that that provides.
Universal school meals.
Yes, yes. And then I think I wanted to highlight here, there are sort of these particular issues where we're seeking action this session. And then there are also just these big picture long-term issues that we champion and that we want you to think of us when these issues come up. So one of those is, and this has come to the forefront more and more recently, especially through my work on the PES working group, which I think you've heard some about. I served on that working group on behalf of NOFA and actually shared the seat with a farmer and UVM Extension agent, Becky Madden, who's excellent and lent so much expertise to the process. And through that, we've really learned so much, as I think maybe Caroline spoke to you all about yesterday, about the complexity in farmers' ability and other land stewards' ability to access all of the existing and often excellent programs that we have to support them in the state. And so we really are excited about the prospect of streamlining access to some of that programming, to really leverage the investments that we've already created at the state level and that we have at the federal level, and to make sure that those are getting to producers. So that's an issue that we're excited to continue working on with you all. We also champion organic agriculture as a climate solution. If you do a meaningful and appropriate life cycle analysis of a lot of inputs on farms, for example, you will find that synthetic fertilizers are byproducts of fossil fuels, and same with many pesticide products that are out there. So between the input side and the soil management side around promoting biodiversity and building soil through practices like cover cropping and crop rotation, we really see organic as filling a need in terms of, to use USDA's term, which I am hesitant to do, climate smart agriculture. We really want to see organic centered in that conversation, and including in the Global Warming Solutions Act and the emissions reductions targets that the state has set for itself. Additionally,
you skip this one. Which dramatically reducing pesticides.
Oh, absolutely. And that's related. You will, I assume, inevitably have many bills in front of you in the coming biennium targeted at reducing pesticides in agriculture and across the landscape in general. We're strongly supportive of that initiative. I think the perspective that we often bring as a farming organization to the pesticide conversation is one of both, yes, a regulator who certifies farms who are not using these practices. We know there are at least 771 operations in the state, including, farmers and processors who have successful businesses that don't rely on the use of these inputs. We know it can work. We really strongly believe in that. And we know that there are a lot of farmers in the state who are, doing agriculture in an economic system that has often, an economic system and frankly, a world of federal policy that has really guided them toward reliance on a lot of synthetic inputs. So we recognize the challenge that a lot of farmers face in making a transition to a different mode of production. It is a systemic change. When a farm changes from conventional to organic agriculture, they often do have to change their entire system. And we are ready and actually building out our education team to be of more assistance to help farmers make that transition. So we try to give that perspective in the pesticide conversation of that it is a whole systems change that we desperately need. We want it to happen as soon as possible. And we recognize that for farmers whose systems are set up to depend on synthetic inputs, it's not going to happen overnight, and we need to support them to make that transition. Okay, and then there are also broader issues. I know you all have talked about farm viability some. We sometimes hear from farmers, yes, all these grants and programs that you have to support us are great. And if we just had access to affordable, high quality, local childcare, we may not need all of these. So we do see affordable healthcare and childcare as just really broad systemic issues that impact everybody and impact people working the land in very particular ways. So while they are not the issues that you might hear us in here talking about on a daily basis, we are in really strong partnership with organizations who are championing issues around healthcare and childcare. We hear about those needs from producers and folks in our community all the time, and really believe in that as a core solution. In terms of equity and justice, we also really want to see targeted efforts to improve access to land, housing, nourishing food, really any and all resources that people need to be self-sustainable and to have self-determination in their lives. Those resources are disproportionately allocated in our state right now. And we're really excited about efforts like the Land Access and Opportunity Board that are really taking a hard look at that issue and working hard to make sure that those issues are addressed. So the Land Access and Opportunity Board was established by the legislature last year. It has met now for, 6 or 9 months and has just delivered a Sunrise report. I believe that was one of the ones that came out over the weekend. And what we want to see is ongoing funding and support to make that board a permanent fixture under VHCB or some other appropriate state entity. And then, finally, the payment for ecosystem services models, that is an issue that I think is going to continue to come up. You all have addressed it in your committee a little bit already. As I said, we sat on that working group that decided to use the Conservation Stewardship Program, that federal program, as the state's pilot. And I personally was just relieved and thrilled to see that working group, which worked really diligently for 3 years, come to a unanimous decision about what to do with our pilot program. The issue of PES is incredibly complex, can be fraught with issues of corporate capture, foreign land investment, overly narrow solutions that focus, that separate parts of the system from the whole. And so Conservation Stewardship Program is a really great option, I think, for us because for one, it's a federal program that already has some administrative capacity attached to it. So more money, I think, can go directly to farmers because less money is having to be spent to stand up and administer a new program. That's one benefit. Another benefit of conservation stewardship is that it involves a whole farm assessment. So when a farmer goes to the NRCS office to apply for CSP, one of the first steps in that process is an NRCS field staff coming out or a conservation district staff coming out to that farm and doing an assessment of sort of all of the resources on the farm in a holistic way, which I think is so critical when we're thinking about ecosystem services. What we want to see are programs that recognize and support ecosystem function as a whole, not that just focus on how much carbon can we sequester. That will have unintended consequences that I think we aren't even fully aware of yet. We also want to make sure that any PES program really centers the needs of farmers, centers social justice outcomes, and focuses on biodiversity as just a core outcome that we want to see across all of our landscape to be as resilient as possible. this is the part where I feel like I'm throwing so much information at you. So thank you for taking it in. I will kind of leave it there for now. And then I don't know, Grace, if you want to touch on some of these just fundamental programs that we sort of want to frame as these are not like necessarily brand new flashy ideas, but please don't forget about them and make sure that you are supporting them as you work through this biennium.
We welcome folks. We have a room capacity issue here. We've just exceeded. The building requires us to have no more than 18 people in the room at a time. We're just about to wrap up. I apologize. I hate to say it, but we'll just see if there's a couple. I think you're 18, so you're good. We'll really, I think, just be a couple minutes and then.
What you do, choose the pretty one?
First in, first out, right? Thanks. Thank you for coming this morning. And are there any final questions? Anybody didn't get to ask a question? Representative O'Brien?
Anybody else wants to first? Just a specific question, and that leads to a broader one, is on that issue of raising dairy calves organically or non-organically, just what's happened with that. And the bigger question is like, what do you guys do to try to level the playing field between all the certifying organic organizations? Because right, what happens in Texas with a certifying organic organization affects our organic dairy farmers here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we've heard for many years now, probably a decade, from organic dairy producers in particular. And this is reflected in different ways across different types of production. But in organic dairy, there is sort of a loophole in the regulations that allows some certifiers interpret the regulations as allowing a farm to raise their calves conventionally until they are, ready to be milk producers and then switch them to organic management. That's obviously a cheaper way to do it than what we require, which is organic calves to be raised organically from the last third of gestation. And that's how we interpret that regulation. So what organic dairy producers have been saying forever is if you just fix these loopholes at the federal level that change the standards from, these big certifiers in the West in particular, who allow this sort of, this conventional management loophole, we will be able to survive. Similarly, the pasture rule, the one that we mentioned that requires animals to be on pasture for a minimum of 120 days. There's also a requirement that organic animals get at least 30% of their feed ration from dry matter, meaning from pasture. And there's a lot of doubt in the organic community about whether that rule is being enforced consistently. The origin of livestock, which is the issue of raising calves conventionally, has been finalized. That rule is final. It is going into effect. We are hoping to see action on that. The pasture rule is a little bit stickier and just basically requires better enforcement on the part of the NOP, which is the National Certification Program. And they've taken some steps toward that. So we are this goes to the point that I mentioned, that at the same time that we're seeking kind of immediate financial relief for these dairies, we are also working on these big picture issues to make sure that we're having a level playing field. Because that's the whole point. We want organic to mean the same thing everywhere.
I think one final question from Representative Templeman, and then I think we better.
Firstly, I apologize for our guest comment. Secondly, what are the unintended consequences of carbon farming? You brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and I would love to talk to you all at length about this. Carbon farming, I think essentially the issue that I personally see in that is that it's taking one element of a system and separating it. So if you're farming, it can lead to similar outcomes that we see across agriculture around seeking economies of scale, for example, through just monoculture production and basically focusing on extractive methods that just focus on yields and profits over long-term functioning of the system. In the case of carbon farming, my personal concern and kind of, I guess, worst case scenario in a lot of ways, which we are starting to see play out, is that if all we're focused on is the amount of carbon sequestered in the soil, first of all, it matters a lot how you measure that. And there are a lot of questions about the reliability of the tools that are currently in play around measuring carbon sequestration. It also can lead to essentially a system that just moves toward more, conventional cover cropping, meaning burning the cover crop down with glyphosate and conventional no-till, as opposed to moving toward more holistic ecological function that, yes, maybe no-till, but also has biodiversity in mind and is using diverse cover crops, if you're just looking at carbon, the diversity of your cover crop may or may not matter as much. So it's essentially just the issue of siloing one part of a system as opposed to moving towards something that works for all of the outcomes that we want to see, if that makes sense. I don't know, Grace, if you want to add anything or.
I think you got it.
Yeah. I just want to close by saying I was able to hear your discussion, I think it was last week or the week before, of all of the members' priorities. And I felt like there is something that we do that ties to every one of them. And I was just so thrilled to hear you all talk about what you're excited to work on this session. I hope that our conversation today has been indicative of that. And I just really look forward to working with all of you. It's exciting to have so many new faces.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in and giving us a chance to hear what you do and what you're thinking about. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you as the session goes on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having your thing on a week.